The cold click of handcuffs was the last thing Evelyn expected to hear after a decade of marriage. Her 5-year-old son Daniel's scream pierced the courtroom as 2 officers pulled her arms behind her back, the metal biting into her wrists. Through the blur of tears and camera flashes, she could see Jason, her husband, the man she'd built from nothing, wearing an expression of practiced grief as he whispered to the cluster of reporters he'd clearly invited. Beside him stood Victoria Bell, Evelyn's former assistant, the woman who used to babysit Daniel while wearing Evelyn's hand-me-down jewelry, now draped in designer clothes and sobbing theatrical tears on the witness stand. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that, given the serious nature of these charges, possession of controlled substances and corporate espionage, I'm denying bail. The judge's voice boomed above the chaos. Mrs. Castro, you're remanded into custody immediately. Evelyn's public defender, a young woman fresh out of law school who looked more terrified than helpful, shuffled papers uselessly at the table. Jason knew this. He knew Evelyn had spent every penny on Daniel's private school tuition and her mother's cancer treatments. He knew she was trapped, desperate, with no money for the kind of legal team that could fight a tech billionaire with unlimited resources and a mistress willing to lie under oath. The courthouse was a cathedral of cold marble and colder justice, where power trumped truth every time. Evelyn watched other families moving through their divorces with dignity, but none of them were being dragged away in chains while their child screamed for his mommy. Her dark skin and natural hair, features Jason once claimed to love, now felt like just another disadvantage in a system designed to believe men like him over women like her. I'm sorry it came to this, Evelyn, Jason's lawyer said, approaching with a smirk that made her stomach turn. If you'd just signed the custody papers like we asked, none of this would have been necessary. But you had to be difficult. The evidence bag sat on the prosecutor's table like a bomb. Pills she'd never seen before, corporate files she'd never touched, all allegedly found in her purse during the mandatory courthouse security screening. Victoria had sworn, hand on Bible, that she'd watched Evelyn spiraling into addiction for months, stealing sensitive documents from Jason's home office to sell to his competitors. The performance was Oscar-worthy. The trembling voice, the reluctant witness forced to tell the truth about her beloved former boss. But before the officers could lead Evelyn through the side door toward the holding cells, before Jason could take Daniel's hand and walk out of the courtroom as the grieving single father, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courthouse burst open. Not just opened, burst open. The sound of footsteps echoed through the marble hall, expensive footsteps, the kind that announced arrival before entry. Through the doorway came a sight that made every conversation stop mid-sentence. 3 men in suits that cost more than most people's cars strode in with military precision, flanking a figure who commanded the room without uttering a word. An older man, distinguished and silver-haired, wearing a 3-piece suit that screamed old money and older power. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it held the deeds to half the city. His eyes swept the courtroom with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen 1,000 legal battles and won most of them. Behind him came 2 younger attorneys, a man and a woman, both carrying tablets and moving with the efficient grace of legal sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Jason's face drained of color. His lawyer, who'd been so confident moments before, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Even the judge straightened in her seat, recognizing the kind of legal firepower that didn't show up for routine divorce cases. The silver-haired man walked directly toward Evelyn, his heels clicking on the marble like a countdown to something monumental. He stopped in front of the officers holding her arms, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd argued before the Supreme Court. "Evelyn Marie Thompson?" Evelyn could only nod, too shocked to speak, her wrists still bound in steel. The man's expression shifted, just slightly, into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so predatory. "My name is Marcus Holloway, senior partner at Holloway, Chen & Associates. I was retained by your late father, Jonathan Thompson, 15 years ago with very specific instructions should certain circumstances arise." He glanced at Jason with open contempt. "Circumstances exactly like these." The judge leaned forward. "Counselor, what is the meaning of this interruption?" Marcus turned to face her, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Your Honor, I'm here to inform the court that my client is the victim of a coordinated conspiracy involving evidence tampering, perjury, and corporate fraud. I have in my possession video surveillance that will not only exonerate Mrs. Thompson, but will require the immediate arrest of Jason Castro and Victoria Bell on multiple felony charges." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's sob caught in her throat. Jason's carefully constructed mask of concern cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Jason jerked away. His eyes locked on Evelyn with pure hatred. Marcus snapped his fingers, and one of his associates produced a tablet, approaching the judge's bench. This footage was recorded by a security system installed in the family. "Residence by Mr. Thompson's father. A system Mr. Castro was unaware existed. It shows Mr. Castro and Ms. Bell planting the alleged evidence in Mrs. Thompson's belongings approximately 4 hours ago." The judge's face transformed from irritation to intense focus. "Bailiff, release Mrs. Thompson immediately. Mr. Holloway, approach the bench. Prosecutor, you need to see this now." As the handcuffs clicked open, Evelyn's wrists burning with their ghost, she looked up at Marcus Holloway, this stranger sent from beyond her father's grave, and saw something in his eyes that made her heart race with a different kind of fear. Not fear of losing, fear of winning, of what came next, of discovering that her father had known all along that Jason was a snake and had left her not just a lawyer, but a weapon. Marcus leaned down, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Mrs. Thompson, your father left you considerably more than legal representation. But first, we're going to destroy the man who thought he could destroy you. Are you ready?" Daniel was still crying in the arms of a court officer. Jason was turning red, his lawyer physically restraining him from approaching the bench. Victoria had gone pale, her mascara running down her face in black rivers that looked nothing like the crocodile tears from moments before. Evelyn Thompson straightened her spine, feeling something cold and sharp unfold in her chest, something that had been sleeping for a decade of supporting a man who saw her as a stepping stone. "I'm ready," she whispered. And the real trial began. The bailiff's voice cracked through the low murmur of the courtroom. "Ma'am, I need you to step over here." Evelyn frowned, fingers tightening around the strap of her leather purse. Daniel sat on the bench behind her, swinging his little legs, oblivious, while Jason leaned close to his lawyer and pretended not to watch. "This is a routine security check," the officer said, too loudly to be routine. He set her purse on the table beside the metal detector and began emptying it with deliberate slowness. Phone, keys, lipstick, a folded drawing Daniel had made of the three of them before everything fell apart. Evelyn's skin prickled. Something was wrong. The officer reached into the inner pocket she rarely used. His hand paused, then closed around something. When it came out, he was holding a small plastic bag filled with neat white pills and a slim manila envelope, edges sharp as accusation. For a heartbeat, the room stayed silent. Then the prosecutor was on his feet, voice booming that these items had just been recovered from the defendant's personal effects. Jason's lawyer rose beside him, oh so grave, murmuring about prior concerns and pattern of behavior. Jason didn't look at her. He looked at the pills like they broke his heart. "That's not mine," Evelyn said. But her voice sounded thin, childish, even to her own ears. The judge's expression iced over. Mrs. Castro approached the bench. She never made it. 2 officers flanked her, hands firm on her arms as if they'd been waiting for this cue. Someone gasped. Daniel started crying, a high, panicked sound that sliced through the formal hush. "Given the severity of these new allegations," the judge said, gavel ready, "this court has no choice but to order immediate detention pending further investigation." The gavel fell. The trap sprung. Evelyn felt the world tilt as metal closed around her wrists, and Jason finally met her eyes. Only long enough to let her see the satisfied flicker buried beneath his mask of sorrow. The holding cell was colder than the courtroom, a concrete shoebox that smelled of bleach and old fear. Evelyn sat on the narrow bench, knees drawn up, Daniel's last scream still echoing in her ears. Every time she blinked, she saw his small hands reaching for her, fingers opening and closing on empty air. Somewhere above her head, Jason was already rewriting the story for the cameras. Concerned husband, devastated father, brave man doing what was best for his son. She pressed her forehead to her cuffed hands until the metal dug into skin. They had taken her laces, her jewelry, even the hairpins from her bun, as if grief itself were a weapon she might brandish. A guard had mumbled something about charges, about narcotics and stolen data, about a decade behind bars if this sticks. The words rolled around in her skull like marbles, never settling. This was it. She had lost. Jason would raise Daniel on lies, and she would become a cautionary tale whispered about in PTA circles and church parking lots. The heavy door buzzed, then swung open. Evelyn didn't bother looking up at first. Another guard, another form, another demand for a signature she didn't understand. But the footsteps that entered were wrong for a cop. Too measured, too sure. Expensive leather on concrete, each step a quiet declaration. "Mrs. Thompson." The voice was smooth, resonant, carrying authority that didn't need volume. She lifted her head. The man standing on the other side of the bars looked like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. Dark charcoal suit that fit like it was poured onto him, silk tie, watch that caught the fluorescent light and turned it into something softer. His shoes were polished to a mirror. His eyes were sharper than any glass. "My name is Marcus Holloway," he said, producing a folded document from a leather briefcase. "Your father retained my firm 15 years ago with instructions to find you under one specific condition." He held her gaze. "If Jason Castro ever had you arrested." The room seemed to tilt. "My father's dead," Evelyn whispered. "Yes," Marcus said gently. "But his plan is very much alive. And if you're ready, Mrs. Thompson, this is where we start taking your life back." The conference room felt too clean for how dirty Evelyn's life had just become. White walls, polished table, a pitcher of water sweating onto a glass tray. She sat opposite Marcus, wrists free now but still tingling with phantom metal, while 2 other attorneys arranged laptops and thin stacks of files with surgical precision. "Your father was a cautious man," Marcus said, opening a slim black folder. "You thought he was just a quiet investor. He was also a man who believed in contingencies." Evelyn swallowed. He trusted Jason. He made him CEO. Marcus's mouth curved, humorless. He made Jason the face. There's a difference. He tapped a key on his laptop, then rotated the screen toward her. This is what your father called his failsafe, a dead man's switch. The image on the screen was a blueprint of her own house, overlaid with tiny symbols. Cameras, microphones, hidden hubs tucked behind crown molding and inside vent grates. Places she'd dusted 100 times without knowing. He wired the house? Her voice came out thin. Why? Because he didn't like the way Jason looked at you once the money started rolling in, Marcus said simply. These feeds never ran through Jason's network. They piped to an encrypted off-site server in your father's name. Access keys passed to this firm the day he died. The second attorney, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, slid a tablet in front of Evelyn. With a swipe, the blueprint dissolved into video thumbnails, each stamped with dates and times. Sleepless nights in the kitchen, birthday parties, arguments, private moments she'd thought were hers alone. Her stomach flipped. This is my whole life. Not your whole life, Marcus corrected softly. Just the parts your father thought might one day save it. He tapped one thumbnail, time-stamped 4 hours before her arrest. This is the ghost in Jason's machine, Evelyn. The thing he never saw, because he never bothered to look up. The frozen frame on the screen showed Jason in their living room, Victoria at his side, both of them laughing. In his hand, Evelyn recognized the same plastic bag the bailiff had pulled from her purse. They dimmed the lights, and the screen on the far wall came alive with the too familiar outline of her living room. Evelyn recognized everything. The scuffed edge of the coffee table, Daniel's abandoned toy truck, the framed wedding photo she'd never had the courage to take down. The timestamp in the corner glowed like a wound. 4 hours before court. Jason strolled into frame first, jacket off, tie loose, the casual swagger of a man on home turf. Victoria followed, heels in one hand, laughing as she tossed her hair and dropped her designer bag on Evelyn's couch as if it were hers now. Evelyn braced for the sound of her own voice, the way she normally moved through this space. But there was only their laughter, loud and easy. "Watch his hands," Marcus said, quietly. On screen, Jason reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the small plastic bag of pills. The camera caught everything in brutal clarity. The way he held it up so Victoria could see, the way she covered her mouth and giggled like they were sharing a dirty joke. He set the bag on the coffee table, then picked up Evelyn's leather purse, the same one that now sat on the conference table, empty and harmless. Evelyn watched herself in absentia as Jason unzipped the purse and slid the bag into the inner pocket she never used. Victoria's laughter doubled when he added the slim envelope of stolen files, tucking it beside the pills with casual precision. He mimed a shocked expression, hand to chest, and Victoria pretended to swoon, collapsing into his arms. Her stomach turned. "That's enough," she whispered. Marcus didn't stop the video. "You need to see this part." Jason snapped the purse closed, kissed Victoria hard, then looked straight past her, straight at the hidden camera he didn't know existed, and smiled. A slow, satisfied curl of his mouth, the smile of a man who believed the story was already over. Evelyn's hands shook, but when she spoke again, her voice had cooled. "Good," she said, "because now I know exactly how it ends." They waited until the footage stopped looping before bringing out the next set of documents. The lights came back up slowly, revealing Marcus and his team watching her with the wary respect one gives someone standing on the edge of a cliff. "Evelyn," Marcus said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "There's one more thing your father left you." Her throat was already raw. "Another camera angle?" "Control," he answered. "Real control." She opened the envelope with fingers that didn't feel like hers. Inside were copies of certificates, stamped and notarized, the paper heavy with the kind of importance you could feel through your skin. At the top of each page, in precise legal font, was the name she'd come to hate over the last year. Castro Tech. "These are shares," the younger attorney explained, tapping the numbers. "Transferred into a trust the year before your father died. Irrevocable. You are the sole living beneficiary." "I don't have shares," she said automatically. "Jason built that company with my father's money, but your father never trusted him enough to give him control." Marcus cut in, voice gentle but unyielding. "Jason has 29% in his own name. Venture capital holds the rest. This trust," he pointed to the bold line at the bottom, "holds 51%. Her gaze dropped to the signature. Jonathan A. Thompson. Beneath it, in clean, undeniable ink, Evelyn M. Thompson, beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt again, but not with the same helpless spin as before. This was a shift, a rebalancing, the ground moving to put her at the center. "You're telling me," her voice faltered, "I own more of Castro Tech than Jason does?" Marcus's smile was sharp this time, almost vicious. "No," he said. "You don't own more. You own it. You are the majority shareholder, Evelyn. Jason Castro wasn't the king." He nudged the papers closer. "He was the mask your father put on his real heir." Something cold and bright unfurled in her chest. For the first time since the handcuffs closed, she didn't feel like prey. "So," she murmured, eyes on her father's signature, "if I walk back into that courtroom tomorrow, I'm not just his wife." "You're his boss," Marcus said, "and the board will listen to you." Evelyn exhaled slowly, the sound closer to a laugh than a sob. Jason had spent years teaching her how small she was. Tomorrow, she would show him exactly how big. The blacked-out SUV slid to the curb outside the courthouse, with a kind of unhurried confidence that made people move without being asked. Evelyn watched the building rise through the tinted glass, the same gray stone that had swallowed her yesterday, spitting her out in chains. Today, the reflection staring back at her was not the woman who'd been dragged away. Marcus had insisted on everything. The tailored navy suit that fit her like it had been built on her bones, the silk blouse, the understated diamond studs her father once gave her for graduating college. Her hair was sleek, controlled, her makeup precise enough to cut. She looked like money. More importantly, she looked like someone who expected to be obeyed. "Timing is tight," Marcus said beside her, adjusting his cufflinks. "They moved the custody conference up once they thought you were safely out of the way. Jason is upstairs right now, about to sign papers that hand him your son." "Not my son," Evelyn said, fingers closing around the cool leather of her new briefcase. "Our son. For now." The corners of Marcus's mouth twitched. "For the next 5 minutes." The door opened. Flashbulbs exploded, reporters pivoting with predatory speed. Yesterday, they'd pointed their cameras at a fallen wife. Today, they turned toward the woman stepping out of the SUV like she owned the building, and, in a way, she did. "Mrs. Castro, are you still being charged?" "Evelyn, is it true you were caught with—" She didn't answer. Security parted for Marcus's card, and the crowd parted for the look on her face. On the 4th floor, outside family court, Jason sat at a conference table, pen poised above the final custody agreement. His lawyer leaned in, murmuring something about closing this out clean. Victoria scrolled her phone in the corner, bored and smug. The doors swung open. Evelyn walked in first. Conversation stuttered, then died. Jason's pen froze over the line that would have made her a legal ghost in her son's life. His eyes tracked upward, taking in the suit, the poise, the team of attorneys flanking her like a personal storm. He went pale. "Hi, Jason," she said, voice smooth as glass. "You might want to hold off on signing anything. There are a few ownership issues we need to address before you try to take anything else that belongs to me." The courtroom felt even smaller the second time around. Yesterday, it had swallowed her whole. Today, it buzzed with a different kind of electricity as Evelyn took her seat at the defense table. Marcus and his team fanning out beside her like a wall of dark suits and quiet menace. Jason sat opposite, jaw tight, fingers laced so hard and his knuckles blanched. Victoria perched behind him, legs crossed, pretending this was just another show to watch. "Your Honor," Marcus began, smooth and calm, "we move to introduce new exculpatory evidence regarding the alleged narcotics and stolen files attributed to my client." Jason's lawyer sprang up. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular?" Marcus cut in. "Is a man framing the mother of his child and expecting the court to applaud." The judge lifted a hand. "Counselor, if you have evidence, present it." Lights dimmed. The screen descended with a mechanical whine. Evelyn's living room appeared in high definition, every detail crisp enough to touch. The timestamp glowed. 4 hours before the arrest. The first sound was Victoria's laugh. On screen, she dropped her bag on the couch, glanced around like a thief casing the place, then turned as Jason entered. The courtroom watched in silence as he produced the plastic bag of pills, the manila envelope, the mocking pantomime of shock. When he opened Evelyn's purse and tucked everything inside, someone in the back actually gasped. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, not the woman on the screen, but the one in the courtroom. Her mascaraed eyes went wide, then wider as the judge leaned forward, face hardening with every second. "Pause," Marcus said. The frame froze on Jason's smirk, his gaze aimed straight at the unseen camera. The judge's voice was ice. "Ms. Bell, please approach the stand." Victoria didn't move. "Now, Ms. Bell." She rose on shaking legs, the confident sway gone, replaced by a stiff, jerky walk. Jason grabbed her wrist as she passed. She ripped free like his touch burned. Under oath, she tried, once, to stick to the script. I saw Evelyn using, Your Honor. She told me she was desperate, that she needed—" "Ms. Bell," Marcus said gently, sliding a printed still frame onto the evidence table. "Is that you, laughing while Mr. Castro hides drugs in my client's purse?" Her gaze snagged on the image. Her throat worked. "You do understand," Marcus continued, "that perjury in this court carries prison time, and that the footage shows not just lying under oath, but participation in a felony frame job. Jason might have promised to take care of you, but he won't be able to do that from a cell." Something in her snapped. "It wasn't my idea," she blurted, voice cracking. "He said she'd land on her feet, that she always does. He told me the worst that would happen is probation." Tears spilled, messy and real this time. "He said no one would ever believe her over him anyway." "Ms. Bell," the judge said, "are you stating that Jason Castro orchestrated this?" Victoria nodded so hard her earrings shook. "He bought the pills. He printed the files. He told me exactly what to say on the stand. I swear, I thought—" "You thought aligning yourself with the man in charge would keep you safe," Marcus finished softly. "But he was never the one in charge." Victoria crumpled into the witness chair, sobbing. Jason lunged to his feet. You lying? Sit down, Mr. Castro, the judge snapped, or I will have you removed in cuffs. Evelyn watched Victoria cling to the edge of the stand, mascara streaking down her face, and felt no pity. The witness hadn't broken out of remorse. She'd broken out of survival. And for the first time in a long time, that instinct was finally pointed at the right man. The courtroom shifted in an instant from theater to crime scene. One moment Jason was on his feet, sputtering denials while Victoria sobbed into her hands. The next, the judge's voice cut through the chaos, crisp and lethal. Mr. Castro, remain where you are. Bailiff, take him into custody for evidence, tampering and obstruction of justice, pending formal charges. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, as if the command couldn't possibly apply to him. Then the bailiff's hand closed on his arm, and the spell broke. Jason jerked back, outrage flooding his face. You can't be serious. I'm the victim here. The only victim here, the judge said, is the woman you tried to frame and the child you used as leverage. You will be silent, or I will have you gagged. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed, a perfect mirror of the sound that had started all of this. Evelyn watched the steel bite into his wrists, watched the flicker of disbelief give way to something raw. Panic. He twisted, searching the room for an ally, but his lawyer stared fixedly at the floor, and Victoria refused to look at him at all. Your Honor, Marcus said smoothly, given the revelation of a long-term corporate scheme involving Mr. Castro, we also have motions regarding Castro Tech. The next few minutes moved like a controlled detonation. Marcus presented the trust documents, the share certificates, the clauses her father had buried in dry legal language that now landed like bombs. The judge reviewed them, consulted briefly with the corporate liaison on standby for high-value divorce cases, then nodded once. On the basis of these documents, she said, this court recognizes Evelyn Marie Thompson as the majority shareholder of Castro Tech and Primary E, controlling interest in its assets. Jason froze. No, that company is mine. You built it with her father's money, the judge replied. Legally, you were an employee with an impressive title. Marcus placed a fresh stack of papers in front of Evelyn, the pages crisp, the signature lines waiting. These, he murmured, are resolutions removing Jason Castro as CEO, freezing his access to company accounts, and transferring executive authority to you as acting chair. The board has already signaled consent, subject to your signature. Her hand hovered over the pen. Yesterday they'd tried to force her to sign away her son, her dignity, her future. Today the ink would run in the opposite direction. Evelyn signed the first page, then the second, each stroke smoother than the last. With every loop of her name, she felt another tether snapping. His control over her finances, her image, her life. When she reached the final line, she didn't pause. She signed, set the pen down, and exhaled. Let the record reflect, the judge said, voice carrying to every corner of the room, that Jason Castro has been removed as CEO of Castro Tech by its majority owner, Evelyn Thompson. All marital assets derived from his position are subject to immediate review and likely reallocation. Jason stared at her as the bailiff guided him toward the side door, the same door she'd been shoved through in chains. Rage twisted his features, but underneath it, she saw something else. The dawning realization that the game board he'd believed he owned had never belonged to him at all. You think this makes you powerful? He spat, fighting the bailiff's grip. You're nothing without me. You always were. Evelyn stood, smoothing the front of her suit. The room watched her now, not as a defendant, but as something else entirely. "That's where you were wrong," she said quietly. "You just spent 10 years underestimating the woman who already owned everything you were so proud of." The door shut on his snarl, cutting it off mid-word. For the first time since her father's funeral, Evelyn felt the shape of his presence beside her. Not as a ghost, but as a hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the empire he'd built for her finally shifted into its rightful form. The office didn't look like she remembered it from the one time Jason had brought her here for a photo op. Back then, it had seemed impossibly large. All glass and skyline, a throne room built for someone else. Today, standing behind the expansive desk with Daniel's small hand wrapped in hers, it felt proportional, as if the space had been waiting for the right person to occupy it. Sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding the room with a clean, unforgiving light that revealed everything. The dust on the awards Jason never actually earned. The fingerprints on the glass table where deals had been made in her father's name. The faint scuff marks on the floor from men who thought they owned the world. "Is this your office now?" Daniel asked, peering up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Ours?" she almost said. Instead, she knelt beside him, smoothing his hair back. "It is," she answered. "Grandpa wanted it to be mine. I just took a while to get here." He wandered toward the window, pressing his palm to the glass. "It's really high," he whispered, equal parts awe and fear. "So was the lie," Evelyn murmured. On the wall behind the desk hung a framed photograph of her father and Jason, shaking hands, both in suits, both smiling. For years she'd looked at that picture and seen partnership, trust, family. Now she saw it differently. Her father's smile was softer, shoulders relaxed. Jason's grin was just a bit too wide, eyes a bit too sharp. The imbalance had been there all along. She just hadn't known how to read it. Marcus had left her alone for this first hour, a small mercy in a day full of sharp turns. The board would convene soon. Papers would be signed, strategies discussed, a new era formalized. But for the moment, it was just her and her son and the ghost of a man who had loved them both enough to plan for a future he wouldn't see. She moved behind the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, nestled among pens and embossed stationery, lay a sealed envelope with her name on it in her father's familiar, precise handwriting. Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she broke the seal. The letter was short, typical of him. No grand speeches, no purple prose. Just a few lines in blue ink, the words steady. "If you're reading this, it means Jason finally showed you who he really is. I'm sorry it had to hurt this much for you to see him clearly. This company was always meant to be your shield, not his sword. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to protect your child. And when you're ready, build something better with it. Love, Dad." The paper blurred. Evelyn blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not now. Daniel's reflection appeared beside hers in the window, small and solid. "Mom," he said softly, "is everything going to be okay?" She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, then straightened, feeling the weight of the room settle around her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle. "Yeah," she said, crossing to him and lifting him onto the leather chair that had once been Jason's. "It is. Things are going to be different, but they're going to be ours." He grinned, spinning slightly in the oversized seat, feet not quite touching the floor. "Do I get a job?" She laughed, the sound surprising her with its ease. "You already have one. You're the reason I'm here." As she turned back toward the window, The city spread out before her like a circuit board. Lines of power, pulsing and bright. Her father hadn't just left her money. He'd left her proof. A net beneath a high wire she'd walked for years, loving a man who chipped away at her until she forgot her own shape. Now, with Jason in a cell and the empire legally in her name, the gift became clear. Not wealth, not status, but perspective. The ability to finally see herself not as the woman lucky to be chosen by him, but as the woman he'd been lucky to stand beside and foolish to betray. Evelyn rested her palm on the cool glass, mirroring her son. Their reflections overlapped, small hand inside larger, two silhouettes against the light. "Ready, Mr. Thompson?" she asked. He nodded solemnly. "Ready, Ms. Boss?" She smiled, the title settling more comfortably than any she'd worn as a wife. Behind her, the office hummed softly. Computers, distant phones, the heartbeat of a company that had survived long enough to meet its real owner. Her father's shield held firm around them. The legacy, finally, was where it belonged. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.